The investment needed to build a dedicated runway and airport facilities can be far too expensive for some places, and on the small Scottish island of Barra, they've done away with tarmac altogether. This is the only place in the world where regularly scheduled flights land on a sandy beach, and things have to be perfectly timed, because during high tide the entire runway is submerged beneath the water. Flights are limited to daytime hours only, but if there's an emergency at nighttime that requires an immediate evacuation from the island, there is the option of illuminating the beach with vehicle lights, with 3 layouts that provide a landing distance of between 2,600 and 2,800 feet. It's rebuilt every year for the summer season, and by the time the sea ice begins to break up around December, flights revert to a more stable airfield further away. Amazingly, it's strong enough to accommodate large aircraft like C-5 Galaxies and Boeing 757s. And when it's in operation, pilots say that the ice almost feels like landing on concrete. Only helicopters and small fixed-wing aircraft are allowed to travel to this airport, and pilots each have to have special training about the place's unique quirks before they're even allowed to attempt it. Number 2. High-wind landings. When conditions are perfect, aircraft are one of the safest and most comfortable ways to travel, but things can quickly change when the wind picks up, especially during the most dangerous part of any flight, the takeoff or landing. Paro Airport is the only international airport in Bhutan, but in a country that's surrounded by the Himalayan mountains, the approach is tricky to say the least. Located in a valley near the Paro Chu River, the nearby peaks reach an altitude of up to 18,000 feet. And these, along with the unpredictable weather they create, means it's one of the most difficult landing spots in the world. In fact, pilots require a specific certification to fly here, and there are less than 24 who hold it. Even then, flights are only allowed during daylight hours and when the weather conditions are clear enough to see the runway and the surrounding terrain. But it certainly makes for a thrilling approach for everyone on board. This means that landing under these conditions, a pilot while traveling at 160 miles an hour is simultaneously pulling back on the control stick, using it to turn into the wind, and using their feet to control the rudder pedals. Number 1. Rancho e Raskin Airport. The Dutch island of Saba is one of the most beautiful in the Caribbean, but when the decision was made to build an airport there, it was only one piece of land that was flat enough for a runway, and it barely had enough space for a 1,312-foot piece of tarmac, which is only slightly longer than there is on an aircraft carrier. Unsurprisingly, the airport isn't used by jets, and the only planes that land there are small twin otters. Only captains are allowed to control the plane as it approaches, as they contend with unpredictable updrafts from the ocean and the mountainous terrain of the island itself. As you can see, there's no room for overshooting the runway, because on either side there's a sharp drop-off over the cliff to the ocean below. Skilled pilots perform some of the most difficult and dangerous plane landings imaginable. Here are 15 of the most difficult plane landings. Number 15. Aircraft carrier landings. Aircraft carriers are the most powerful naval ship, providing a platform from where both nautical and aerial missions can be launched. Their maneuverability comes at a cost, however, because their short runways and instability on the currents and waves of the ocean make them arguably the most difficult landings pilots can ever be required to make. Nowadays, they have an angled design that allows for landings and takeoffs to be conducted simultaneously, but still, there's not quite enough room for approaching jets to decelerate fully. They have to calculate their touchdown precisely to land at the right spot, and cables latch onto the jet to help bring it to a full stop. Even with all of this, landings can be pretty hairy. There's a reason why these pilots are seen as the best of the best. The problem isn't anything to do with the 3,254-foot-long runway itself, but the approach to the tarmac, which you can only actually see just at the last moment before touching down. Pilots have to set themselves on a course that takes them directly towards a mountain range, and it's such a counterintuitive thing to do that a checkerboard target has been installed to help them keep on track. Just before they reach it, they have to make a sharp 90-degree turn to line themselves up with the runway and hope that they're able to land and stop in time. Overshooting it leads to a vertical drop off the cliff into the water, and crews often put on life jackets before landing just in case things go wrong, which they do far more often than you'd like to think. Congonhas Airport. Congonhas Airport is one of the busiest airports in South America, serving the city of Sao Paulo in Brazil. But pilots have long warned that the approach, particularly towards the 1.2-mile-long runway 35, is so dangerous, it's risking potential tragedy. If you look out of the windows as the plane's about to land, you can't help but notice the high-rise buildings that surround you, and it feels like you're just skimming the tops of them during the final approach. Add to this the rapidly changing weather conditions in the area, and pilots have very little room for maneuver to touch down. Within the industry, it's often referred to as the aircraft carrier. And if they fail to get the wheels on the tarmac within the first 1,000 feet, they're told to abort and try again. Things quite often go slightly wrong and planes run off the tarmac at the end, which is why airport authorities have had to introduce strict limits to the number that can land there each hour, so no one is feeling time-pressured into decisions that could lead to even more accidents. With such remote villages and very little flat land, however, one of the runways in the country is possibly the most extreme in the whole world. Known as the Matakane Airstrip, it's mainly used by charities and medical flights to provide assistance to the nearby communities. It has a bumpy surface that's maintained by some of the locals, but the most notable thing about it is that it ends at a cliff that leads to a 2,000-foot drop. After navigating the peaks on the approach, pilots have to precisely touch down, otherwise they risk clipping the cliff edge. Takeoffs here are even more scary because the runway isn't long enough to achieve full lift, so the planes fall off into the precipice before gaining enough momentum to fly away. With so little space, it's a miracle that there was room to build an airport in the first place. But this has come with its compromises. It might not seem like there's anything too unusual on the approach, but pilots have to contend with harsh winds that blow across the Mediterranean and have to time things perfectly. Unlike most airports where the runway is solely used for takeoffs and landings, the one here is bisected by one of the busiest highways of the town. Land too early and you might find yourself careening straight into a line of traffic, and planes constantly have to be on the lookout just in case users of roads miss the warnings to stop when a flight is approaching.